Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, A-L-I-V-E, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Hello and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I feel excited to be here today with my guest, Michael Welp. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, Shayna. Thanks.
Yeah, we are going to talk about today, we're going to talk about diversity. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a white man in the realm of diversity. We're going to talk about Michael's work. This is a really exciting and moving topic for me. And Michael and I have known each other for years, and I've always respected you and looked up to you and, deeply moved by the work you're doing in the world. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for that reflection.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Michael, I'm going to give him an introduction, and then we're going to dive into this important topic. So Michael is a co-founder of White Men as Full Diversity Partners, a US-based leadership development consultancy. And for 20 years, he's led pioneering workshops engaging white male leaders and building leadership skills to create cultures of full inclusion. He focuses on how to engage white men to become more passionate advocates for inclusion and how they can partner better with women and across all cultures. His company also engages men as gender equity advocates worldwide. Earlier in his career, Michael facilitated interracial team building with over a dozen South African corporations and in his work with Outward Bound. And following his research on how white men learn about diversity led to founding this company. He is the author of a recently published book, 4 Days to Challenge, 12 Radical Habits to Overcome Bias and Thrive in a Diverse World. And his amazing TED Talk is posted on YouTube, and you should definitely watch it, entitled White Men, Time to Discover Your Cultural Blind Spots. Awesome. Michael, thank you again for being here. And I want to start with a letter that you wrote to Nelson Mandela, because it's so moving to me, that you wrote to Nelson Mandela after being in South Africa with your amazement that he embraced, after 27 years in prison, right, that he embraced the white men who imprisoned him and actually forgave them. And you let him know that the love he showed, that love as the force for change, that he impacted you so deeply that you carry that same thread and you're passing it on in the work you do here. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how you started, how you came to write that letter, how this became a passion of yours?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's like taking me right into the heart of everything to start off. And
yeah,
I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa, and I went to Minnesota, and I worked for Outward Bound for many years. And I got really turned on to diversity when I moved to Washington, D.C. for grad school. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was going to grad school to be a better facilitator. And I was like, wow, this whole diversity, intercultural work is fascinating. So I went to Outward Bound in South Africa. Wow. And it was right after Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And we were doing these 8-day hiking courses for mining groups and banks and pharmaceutical groups from all across South Africa. And
you were taking them on these trips.
I was taking them, co-instructing on these trips with a local Lesotho instructor. And they were like working the same shifts, but had never ate meals together, never slept in the same rooms, never drank beer together.
Wow. Okay, so white men on the same teams.
White men and black men in the mining groups. And then the banks had women as well. So folks coming across race for the first time,
Wow.
really, on these courses. And we had them belaying each other up rock climbs and doing all these team initiatives. And they were
Wow.
like, at the end of the week, they were like, wow, we're all brothers and sisters. We have the same hopes and fears. They were taught to be different, and they were discovering their sameness. And I was discovering my same
Wow.
with the white guys. I was
Yeah.
like, first I was like, no, those folks of color are really cool, spiritual energy, dancing around the campfire. It's all this spontaneous, amazing storytelling. And then I'm like, these white guys are good guys one-on-one.
Uh-huh.
They're more like me than I'm comfortable with, because they were demonized as perpetrators of oppression around the world.
Right. Well,
And
and
yet,
you just said something really interesting. These white guys are more like me one-on-one, and yet there's something different that happens, it sounds like, in the group think or the group act.
well, I thought it was different at first. It's like they're in charge. Their culture permeates and dominates in South African society. Everybody's conforming
Yep.
traditionally over
Yep.
time to they're in power, and it's not that different here. You think about the founders of this country in the U.S. Think about the founders of most organizations. It's a white male culture.
Yes.
It's and those of us are in the insider group in that, who belong in that group. And so I got really compelled in South Africa to come back to the US, learn how to work with white men, and do the work, um, our work with each other, and kind of discover what's next for me on my diversity learning. So I came back, I
And
did.
okay, when you say you wanted to come back and do the work to what?
Well, I wasn't sure. I was like, what's next for me as a white man to support diversity, to support inclusion? What's next on my personal journey? And so I ended up doing a doctorate program, and I studied the learning journeys of 8 white men who worked full time on inclusion and diversity issues.
Wow.
I went to their houses all over the country and up in Canada, and I found all of them learned everything about what they knew about diversity from women and people of color, and they did not turn to other white men at all. And
Wow.
in
Okay,
fact,
that's really interesting.
they disconnected from white guys and were kind of angry at their own group. So there was like a spiritual disconnection to other white men that these men had, and they just ended up being friends with primarily women, people of color. And they're like, my colleague, Bill Proudman, also came from an outward bound background. And he was kind of realizing the same thing. He's like, we need to figure out how white guys can engage each other in a healthy way around diversity learning, and not put the burden of educating us on women, people of color, who at the upper echelons of many corporations are the minority, and the majority is white men.
Right.
It's not sustainable to have the smaller numbers of women, people of color, educate us. And when you do speak up and tell us your truth, we can cross-examine you and say, well, maybe you need more coaching, or maybe you just need to try harder.
Right. Right. All those things.
Yeah. So we started 20 years ago doing something called a white men's caucus, which is put white guys in a room for 4 days and focus on ourselves instead of let's examine race through people of color and women. What does it mean to be white and male? And for many of us, heterosexual. And what do we not know about how our world is different than the world you live in, and what you navigate on a daily basis, like your own personal safety and other things that me and
Yeah.
other men don't.
So, okay, here a couple questions come to mind. I mean, one, amazing that you had the thought to do this, that you wanted to do this, right? I mean, I feel supported, right, as a
Oh,
woman, as a
yeah.
minority. And how did you get men there, first of all, right? Like, in a way, there's a question of what's in it for you guys, because one of the things
Yeah,
you said that
yeah.
white men don't realize is that the
Mhm.
process of learning the benefits of diversity is actually life-changing
Yes,
for white men.
yes, it
So
is.
what is, yeah, say more about that.
Well, most of the default thinking is, oh, diversity is about helping women and people of color with their issues,
Right, right.
and I'm going to come support you, Shayna, on your issues. But I've got a lot of other things on my plate, and yeah. So honestly, most white men don't understand that it has until they're like 24 hours into a 4-day process of,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, light bulbs. This has everything to do with how to be a better partner with
Uh-huh.
my spouse,
Mm-hmm.
how to be a better parent, how to be a better leader, how to be a better person. And it actually, by having to examine the water I've grown up in and the fact that I have a culture, I just equated it with being a good human. Now all of a sudden I understand the white male cultural box. I have more choice about using its strengths and stepping outside of it when it serves me better.
Well, okay. And so just to clarify too, you said, it still sounds like how to be a good partner, how to be a good person. It still sounds like it's doing for the benefit of others. And I think you also have seen how it benefits you. Can you speak to that part as well? I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm intending, is to speak to that. Is that by recognizing I have a cultural box, by realizing that my experience is different in the world, I'm not navigating things that you have to navigate as a woman or
yep.
people of color navigate. All of a sudden, I understand how to partner better with you. I understand that um, I am stuck in a cultural box because I don't see the box because I've never had to leave it.
Uh-huh.
If I grow up in the water, I'm the least like a fish, least to understand the cultural waters I have. And I'm therefore kind of, they're like a background operating system. I don't even know that I'm taught to be a rugged individualist, to not ask for help, don't show weakness, to
Mm-hmm.
think in black white terms and take out all the uncertainty, to focus on rationality as a source of truth and disconnect from emotion, because I assume it takes away from being in control or being rational, which is a white male unique kind of perspective, and to focus on action, fixing things, and sort of banter as a way to connect, but don't show too much depth of vulnerability.
Right.
Those
Right.
are like, those are those are the very same things that often make white men um, get us in trouble in our primary relationships too. I know this is a big,
Yeah.
what you work on. And so what I find is the white men who go through my caucus and have had similar learnings, or they read the book, or they go through somehow this reflection around who they are as white men, they get it's very liberating.
Yeah.
They're afraid they're going to get beat up and blamed for diversity, but they actually find, wow, this is so freeing. I actually have permission to not have to have this figured out. I can
Yes.
show up.
That's what I
Yeah.
was going to say, right? It's not even just for your partner or for someone else,
Mm-hmm.
but to get out of that box of I can't show my emotions. I can't actually admit that I don't know how to solve
Mm-hmm.
this problem, right? I've
Right.
seen so many men who feel a lot of pain, a lot of shame, even to the point where they feel like some part of them is dying inside, being
Mm.
stuck in this white male box that they didn't even necessarily know was a box. It just seemed like, well, this
Yeah.
is reality.
Yeah. And that happens in personal relationships. It happens in the workplace where,
Mhm.
wow, I really, these white men, I just can't feel them. They're not in their heart. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. And what's keeping that? Because I would trust them more as a leader if they spoke more authentically. And yet we've
And
grown
who
up.
are you speaking as? Like, who are you that would trust them more as a leader?
I would say, well, I would say women, I would say folks of color, and
Mhm.
sometimes even other white men who we conform to that box ourselves. So we kind of
Yep.
leave part of ourselves at that door.
Yep.
And I know white men who have, gosh, I'm more of a heartfelt leader, but I don't feel like I have permission to do that in the organizational culture. So
Uh-huh.
I'm supposed to leave that at the door, and they
That's
realize
huge.
there's a price they pay for that,
What would you say? What is the price for that? Because I think that's a very common belief. I've got to leave my emotions or
Yeah,
my heart at the door.
yeah. Well, I would say that the assumption is, because of our low tolerance of uncertainty and either or thinking, that we're either rational or we're emotional,
Uh-huh.
and that my credibility in most organizations comes from being rational and having
Yes.
data. Here's the data. I got all my ducks in a row.
Yep.
Um, and assumption is, if I'm emotional, I lose my rationality. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what's consciously or unconsciously often in the white male cultural norm. So we leave our emotions behind. Now, cost for that, a lot of our constituents, if I'm an organizational leader, don't resonate all at the head level only. They really resonate at the heart level. So people don't trust me. People don't believe me, because for some other cultures, truth is signified by emotion, not by rationality. And, that whole vulnerable side compels people to follow leaders and to follow others. And certainly in a personal relationship, a primary relationship, you don't want to have a relationship with a robot, a guy that's disconnected. And so, and speaking as a white man who's had a sense of being the tin man himself, where's my heart? How come I can't express that? How come it's so hard to cry? How come it's so hard to share different emotions? It costs me dearly, and just being disconnected from a huge part of myself and a source of my energy. I feel like I'm still working on freeing up some of those, the mask. It's a great book. There's a great video on masculinity called The Mask We Live In. And it's really like that. Also another one called Tough Guys. It's all the genre of, show no chinks in the armor, and that's there's a disconnection for men and white men because we don't show vulnerability with each other. So you hear the story of a guy going off to his best friend for the day to fish. And then he comes home and his wife says, "Hey, your buddy was going through that divorce. How is he?" "Oh, I don't know. I didn't ask him about that." Don't go there. And women, you have much more permission to drop right into vulnerability, show and connect and get support. We don't even know sometimes that we could be having that.
Right.
And we're disconnected and lonely. And sometimes we rely on our primary relationships for all our emotional, it's like you're our emotional buoy, and that's not healthy. That we overload our primary relationship for a lot of stuff.
You're a humble man. I've known you for a long time. And so I just want to put this in the context, right? That you're working with some of the largest companies in the US and even worldwide at this point, right? I mean, this isn't like you have this little mission and you're working with, 8-person companies. You're working with Fortune 500 companies,
Yeah, we were the largest defense contractors in the world, some of the biggest healthcare organizations in the world, and more recently internationally too, around gender equity. I spoke to the UN last November about engaging men as gender equity champions.
So it's so funny because I could see a man listening to this and thinking, all right, but whatever, maybe he's just, having these little experiences, but you are bringing this into, some of the largest corporations and organizations in the world, and it's going really, really well, right? So I'd love to hear some of what you're finding the takeaways are when after these 4 days, what are men saying to you?
Well, you mentioned humility, and I think that's one of the hugest Ed Schein wrote a series of books called Humble Inquiry, Humble Leadership right now. And he's studied the dominant culture for years in the US and kind of wrote the book about organizational culture. And he says, our culture has too much doing and telling in it. There's not enough humility and not enough inquiry. So people aren't learning, they're making mistakes and making assumptions in all kinds of areas. And so as the result of the White Men's Caucus, for example, we've had some catalyst research, the impact of this on one company, Rockwell Automation. They interviewed the coworkers and surveyed the coworkers of guys who went through these programs. 4 months afterwards, the coworkers said these guys listen 33% more.
Wow.
That was that's like a sustained change, which is why some companies have actually gotten thank you cards from the spouses of the white men saying, "We don't know what you did to my husband, but I don't want the old husband back. He listens to me and listens to my kids better. He's more open." And, I was a coaching call yesterday with a big client. He talked about, I have more empathy. I reach out and touch my employees more. I make sure they know that I see them and feel them and I'm present to them. That's priceless. I mean, when you
Well, what is the impact then on the business? Because
uh-huh.
it's easier to see the personal benefits.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, you can extract, if you have people listening a third more, what might be the benefit for customer relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Some customers do feel like those white male cultural dominance creates a sense of arrogance. That actually, one CEO went out on a listening tour, and she found, you guys don't listen to us as customers. You assume you know better. So there's some sense of building up more humble inquiry and more balance to this overuse. So
Yes.
what I want to say is white male culture is not bad. It has this, a lot of strengths that have helped our society and
Yes.
companies. And the overuse of it is what can create a weakness. A
Mm-hmm.
strength overused can. So if I overuse the don't ask for help, if I overuse the stay in my head, disconnect from my heart, those are what creates the problems. And so
Right. And you're not saying to throw these out. You're actually just saying to
no,
bring more balance in.
bring more balance. We talk about our work, 8 critical leadership skills, which are integrating head and heart instead of rationality over emotion as the
Mm-hmm.
cultural norm. We talk about courage to be vulnerable, the listening as a way of understanding. Most of us white men are trained to listen to debate or listen to fix, as
Right.
opposed to just simply listen to be present and understand.
Uh-huh.
And all those skills balance out the overuse of this culture so that we don't run amok. Most people derail their careers by overusing their strengths at a personal level. And the same thing happens at a cultural level. We overuse the cultural tenets and derail ourselves. And so, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
humbleness, the heart connection. So one other group we've been working with for 10 years, one of the largest companies in the world, they surveyed, they actually surveyed all the direct reports of everybody who went through these 4-day programs,
Yeah.
a couple thousand people. Everybody who went through the program had a 6% higher rating by their direct reports of trust and integrity and
Yes.
overall skill than everybody who did not. And
Wow.
so, I mean, we have the benefit of working with folks often for 3 or 4 days, and that, like, it's often described as life changing.
Yes.
And it shows up in the, just a lot more genuineness and authenticity. People have permission to be messy in those conversations about diversity, and though a lot more learning can happen because you're not
Mm-hmm.
walking on eggshells and avoiding, what can go wrong. I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to pretend I don't see difference and treat everybody the same, which
Yeah.
unfortunately, the sameness definition we don't even know is that we're expecting everybody to fit in the white male box and
Right.
act like us, and we'll treat them the same. So
Well, and
there's
I
a
love that you have a
yeah.
way of talking about this and highlighting this, right? That it's not attacking white men, right?
No,
You and I
it's
are
like
aligned in that.
going back to what I said to Nelson Mandela. It's loving, coming from a place of love, just like he did.
Yes.
It's like there's no intentionality for most white men to disconnect or not ally as strong as we can.
Mm-hmm.
We say we want to treat everybody the same, not knowing that we're leading people to act like us in order to treat them the same. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not an intentional thing. It's an unconscious thing. Most of the discrimination that's conscious has been rooted out of our organizations these days, but there's a lot of unconscious bias. So
That's huge.
yeah, and,
Right?
and and for you as a woman or
Mm-hmm.
a person of color, part of your work in partnering better with white men might be coming and recognizing what assumptions you make about white men at a group
Yes.
level that get in your way of partnership. If you
Right.
think we don't care about diversity, we're just doing it because we forced to,
Yep.
you're gonna not
Right. Or
even
if I'm
oh,
villainizing and
yeah, exactly.
making all these assumptions, then I'm coming not in a collaborative way,
Yeah.
but in a way that actually
Yeah.
shuts down the dialogue and the conversation.
Yeah, and so there's a couple mindsets that we use that are really helpful in our book, which support this. And I
Yeah.
mentioned these as some of the mindsets in my book, which is that it's not that my view of the world is wrong. More likely, it's incomplete. And
Yes.
so I'm not telling white men our view is wrong or what we think is wrong, because it isn't. And it's just simply incomplete. I
Yep.
don't know I have blind spots. I don't see some of the things that you're navigating in the world that I don't have to navigate, and I don't realize to what degree I'm supporting a system that has to fit into my box, cultural box, and act like me,
Mm-hmm.
and leave part of yourself at the door. So, when we are open to that fact that we just don't see the whole picture, it just gets us into that curiosity. Well, what am I not seeing? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, yes, I'm wrong, or somehow it's my fault or anything. We have a paradox called not my fault and I'm
Yes.
responsible. We don't have to apologize for something we didn't do. And we're responsible for knowing how these dynamics systemically do show up and play out.
I love, okay, you say, you're saying so many things again with your humility. It's like, oh yeah, there's just this, which, it's huge. Any one of these we could dive into for hours. So the paradox shift of going from it's not my fault to I can take responsibility. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's closely aligned with the difference between focusing on intent and focusing on impact. So
Uh-huh.
if I have done something that is from an unconscious, like interrupt you as a man, you probably experience that from men, or women say, they'll say an idea in a meeting and won't be heard or picked up, and a man will repeat it, and then
And then it will be.
the leader will say, "Great idea, Joe." I can use my privilege for as being Michael, saying, actually, that was Shayna's idea. Good idea, Shayna. But for me, if I offend you,
Mm-hmm.
I can do two things. I can focus on defending my good intent or my
Uh-huh.
good guyness. Hey, Shayna, I'm really a good guy. I didn't mean that. And I can focus on the impact I've had on you and just assume that I have good intent and not try to have to defend that. Wow, Shayna, tell me more how I just impacted you.
Yes.
And whatever you're going to say, I'm going to learn a lot from. And so
Woo.
the not
That
my
takes
fault.
courage.
Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
not, don't get caught up in defending my good guyness. Just assume you are and go after I'm responsible for understanding how I'm impacting you.
Well, right. And this one is huge in itself. I mean, and it takes something to be able to hear. And I work with this a lot in personal, in romantic relationships too, right? To
Yeah.
be able to hear something your partner is saying
Yeah.
that they were impacted by that hurt them, or, they
Yes.
felt hurt
Yeah.
by, and to be able to hear it fully without defending
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you've done it exactly the way they said you did, or that
Yeah.
you maliciously or intentionally created that harm, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
that you're a bad person. All
Right.
those things start to come up in the face of hearing those. So it takes
Mm-hmm.
courage to actually sit there and listen and not defend. And I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
business and family and romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is get how we're impacting each other and then be empathetic about that. And
Right.
wow, I get your world about that. And it's like, wow, my
Yes.
my view of the world just gets bigger because I
Yeah.
understand more about your experience in the world and not
Right.
just defending mine.
Right. And I remember in a romantic relationship years ago where I was having a conversation with a man, and there was something he did and it hurt me, or I
Mm-hmm.
felt hurt, we should say, right? If I'm taking responsibility, I felt hurt. He said
Yeah.
something in a way that I felt hurt. And I remember his response was he started, like, his shoulders slumped and his head went down and he started beating himself up. And I could see he was going into this whole shame spiral
Yeah.
with it. And I looked at him and I was like, no, stop it. Like, I need you to actually come back here and be with me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, you're going away and you're beating yourself up. And he suddenly kind of popped out of it and realized,
Nice.
oh, right, I can stay here with
Yeah.
her, right? So there's a way that it's so easy for all of us, no matter what gender or race or whatever we are, to start beating ourselves up and go into our
Mm-hmm.
own shame. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a perspective shift
Yeah.
to realize, oh, it's not my fault. And I can really fully be impacted by the impact I've had on another. And
Mm-hmm.
that builds trust, as you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I can actually, wow, when you share how I just impacted you, I notice I feel really sad.
Yeah.
And I feel really grateful that you're willing to share it, so I know it. And that's a connecting kind of process. And
Right. And if you're the leader of a
yeah,
team, or if you're the boss of
yeah,
someone who, and you're able to actually have that kind of conversation, think about how much more loyal that person is, right? That person,
yeah,
wow, I want to
yes,
work for you. I
yes.
want to stay here. And
Yeah, and even the what I keep calling the white male cultural box pre-sets up what kind of questions I might ask you as a
right.
colleague, as a partner, or even as a lover. It's like, tell me the three things that I should be doing differently, Shayna. That's the doingness, the problem solving. What is wrong? What's actually going wrong? As opposed to outside, if I go outside of the doing box into outside of the white male culture, I might ask you questions like, what's it like to be you right now, Shayna?
Uh-huh. Less personal focus.
Yeah, and I'm less focused on the future, creating something in the future, but more present with you in the moment too.
Right.
And that's like a different place of connection. And
Yes.
I
I
and
love that.
if I'm integrating head and heart, I'm like, wow, I'm noticing how joyful I feel when I get to see your face here and start to have this dialogue.
Yes.
It's
I
like
love how
that's
this is so aligned. I mean, I talk about, head, heart, and
mm,
body or sex or whatever, right? And
yeah,
that even comes in. I mean, sex is a whole different topic when we're talking about business, but
yeah,
and also this way of I work with men on mastering their attention, right? Coming back from the future into this moment, or from their head into
yeah,
their
yeah,
bodies,
right,
or from
right,
myself and my like preoccupation with myself and what I might be doing wrong, to attention on the other person. So you're speaking all of these things that creates more respect, more
yeah.
intimacy, more trust, all of that.
I think a lot of women, as well as people of color and white men, don't realize the degree that so many white men and so many men are driven by a culture that we don't even know we have, and that you also as women are also often assimilating into that culture, especially when you're in the work world.
Right.
And it's like you might attribute things to individual white men, and they present moment and less in the being mode and those kinds of things. And I have to buck that culture in order to have some of these things that give me strong relational skills.
Right. What do you think? Because I know one of the other mindsets you have is show up with vulnerability, and that it's actually a form of courage, and
Mm,
you can create more openness and deeper connections, as we were talking about. But I'm wondering, I would think that would be one that a lot of men would balk at, or would think, we've covered this a little bit, that men
yeah.
would think, wow, I could lose my job, or I could be seen as incompetent, or, what have you seen around that when men actually
Uh-huh.
start being vulnerable?
Well, I remember myself, I was presenting to a CEO and a group of 60 executives, and they asked me a question: how many people need to go through this program to change our culture? And my answer was, I don't know. And the guy in the front
Mm.
row said, well, that's helpful. He's like, he's speaking for that organizational culture, which is you're supposed to have the answer.
Yep.
If asked, I don't know if you've heard of the acquired male answer syndrome. When
No.
asked definitive question, give a definitive answer, whether you know what you're talking about or not.
Interesting.
So the idea of saying, I don't know, or I need help, or I'm confused, or I
Right.
feel
Not on the
scared,
table, not an option.
not often on the table. And it's mostly us growing up as men. If you did that, the rest of the guys would gang up on you and well, he's the one we're going to pick on now,
Right.
or our banter with. And maybe it's a playful way, but maybe it's a little jabbing
Oh
too.
yeah.
Like,
And out
it,
of the
yeah,
tribe, right? Out of
yeah.
the
Maybe it's, maybe from partly from war times and stuff where we had to like suck it up and,
hmm
train each other to do that, but
hmm
it costs us dearly. And so it's a conscious thing. Brene Brown's work and others have really held up the idea of vulnerability as a form of courage.
Yeah. And so what
And
happened for you in that moment when that guy said, well, that's helpful? Where did it go from there?
I thought about what I should have said, but I just laughed at him
You
actually.
stayed with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. And,
But so that's an example of, maybe you didn't necessarily build trust, but I would think there was some trust built there also on your being honest versus, making up some false answer.
Well, yeah, and he had only known me for 20 minutes, but yeah, when I walked out of that client system in the first meeting I ever had, their first words out of their mouth, I found out later, were, he feels so compelled to do this work, he'd probably do it for free.
Uh-huh.
And the guy, the leader, said, I don't know what we're going to do, but these are the folks we're going to do it with. I mean, they were
Right.
so
Okay.
they
So
were so
that's,
moved by,
yeah.
I just showed up and talked authentic. I hear that all the time. Clients say everybody else kind of gives us a slick sales thing, and you just
Yes.
come in and you just talk naturally and share, and you all show up real. And
Thank
it's
you.
like, we
Okay.
want
That's a
that.
great, right. So that's a great example of, you can say something like, I don't know, and someone might even make a joke. And yet then you walk out
Yeah.
of the room and you find out that what they're saying is, I trust these people,
Yeah.
something was different about them. There's something
Yeah.
that feels safer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I trust they're going to tell us the straight scoop.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so we model the presence that we want to help teach and bring, which is being in the white male cultural box, but also stepping outside of it and showing that whole range of expanded possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, again, as often when I do these conversations, they could go on for hours, but for time's sake, what do you want to leave men with? And some of our listeners aren't just men, but, we
Yep.
really are directing these conversations towards the men. So,
Hmm.
what do you want them to know?
I think, you can watch another version of some of what I'm sharing in my TED Talk that gives some different language around some insights. So one of the things I like to say is, recognize that you're part of a group. You probably never thought about that before, and that you have a culture that's not the same for every white man is not the same, but that it impacts your life and impacts how you have mindsets and behave and think, and it limits at the same time some of your freedom to be more effective in relationships. And I would also say overall that, a lot of people today's world have learned to trust fear more than they trust love.
Mm,
And what we are doing is, learning partnerships that are based on mutual respect, based on love. And that's all head and heart work as well. And so notice, even in the media, that there's so much reinforcement based on fear, that if we're going to create the kind of partnerships in the world that are going to create democracy to survive and all of us to thrive amongst diversity across the globe, across the country, even across the street from our neighbors,
mm-hmm.
we need to stay curious and be more from that place of humble inquiry and come from a place of love and
Thank
notice
you.
that. Yeah.
I love that you, to me, are a living example of this. And again, not that it wouldn't be any less valid if you were working with smaller companies, but there is something about the fact that you're seeing results with, very mainstream culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with some of the biggest companies in the world, again, it's like, I feel so
Mm.
just touched and inspired to see what's possible. And that, some people might say, oh, fear versus love, it's this airy woo woo belief. But to me, what you're doing is you're actually bringing it into real time in businesses, in people's
Mm-hmm.
lives who've never really thought about things from this viewpoint before. So thank you for being someone who felt compelled, from
Mm.
your own life experience to actually find a way to help men like you not only realize how they can be supports for other people and minorities, but then also to recognize how it can benefit you as well. That's something I
Mhm.
feel strongly about. It's like, you've got to
Yeah.
be able to do the work and have a really good impact in the world, but it can't be at the cost of your own heart, your own vitality, right? You can't lose yourself. And men can tend to do that, to let themselves go to take care of others. So
Right.
that you're bringing it all together.
Yeah, and that we can have ourselves and our partnerships, not
Exactly.
have to give one priority over the others. I think the other thing I would just say is it's a very hopeful piece of work. It's pretty courageous for companies to say, we're going to do something called the White Men's Caucus. We're going to put white guys in a room. It's like people have all kinds of confusion around that, and it gets their attention. And as we go around the world, I've seen enormous passion in India, for example, in our sessions around engaging men as gender equity champions, and Japan and Beijing and Singapore and Poland and across Europe and stuff. There's a lot of hunger in the last few years, particularly around stepping men up as gender equity champions. And so that's exciting to feel that energy in the world.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.